Hi, I'm Edward Funk, and this is podcast number 42. But before an important announcement. The book Behind the Door, The Real Story of Loretta Young, is now available as an audiobook, and you can get it on Amazon. Get it, and then, of course, tell all your friends to get it. Okay? Now, back to podcast 42. I always enjoy being with Loretta, who is now dividing her time between Palm Springs and her home in Beverly Hills. When she was in town, she'd call and ask if I was interested in having dinner. I was fine if we were having dinner at home, but we'd long gotten beyond the fantasy that Loretta could cook. So usually I did those honors. Now, if she were inviting others to dinner, there was a woman who would bring dinner in advance, and then all Loretta had to do was pop it into the oven. One such occasion was when she invited Altavis Davis and her mother. Altavis was the young widow of Sammy Davis Jr. She'd been a chorus girl, and she was really very, very attractive. A major theme that evening was how they all loved beluga caviar. I thought to myself, no one at this table grew up eating caviar. But then I remembered that Mrs. Davis was fighting the government over tax problems and had been since her husband died. The beluga caviar conversation was just escape as fare until in an effort to recall better days. I found it interesting that Loretta and Sammy Davis Jr. Had a very, what's the word I'm looking for, close friendship. In fact, a lot of the movies in Loretta's library, a lot of her own movies in her library, had been gifts from Sammy. Now, she continued to include me in her orbit, and now much of that was in Palm Springs. She had people in for cocktails at least 3 times a week before hosting a dinner at the house or going out. She loved having fun and having fun people around. Now, Greg Fisher, Loretta's sometime boyfriend, when he wasn't doing more important things, told me that Loretta's mother had been much the same way. Work hard, but then have fun. In the years I knew Loretta, I must have attended 100 of these gatherings. They wouldn't be large, 2 or 3 couples, but the criteria was that you had to be fun. Leave your troubles at home. Loretta had a theory. She said everyone has problems. Those who seem problem-free are just the better actors. Now, Loretta was queen bee at these little dinner parties, and she enjoyed that role. But one day she asked me if I thought she was monopolizing these gatherings. I truthfully told her no, because she had such great stories to tell. Everyone wanted to hear them. Nevertheless, she asked me to tug on my ear if I thought someone was unhappy about not getting their share of attention. I only tugged my ear once. That was an evening when Jane Wyman was a guest. Now, I had picked her up at her Rancho Mirage home, and we got off on the wrong foot. She was discussing something about her former television show, Falcon Crest, and I had to admit that I'd never watched it. She seemed offended. Then I added the reason was that the series with a continuing storyline from week to week, it was hard to follow if one hadn't been watching all along. Well, then she said she was aware of that could be a problem, and that she had spoken to the director about it, but he really hadn't done anything. Anyway, my excuse seemed accepted. During dinner, Loretta was her mesmerizing best. Jane Wyman was not amused. I took a veer, and Loretta slowed down. As I took Miss Wyman home and returned to Loretta's, I mused about trying to pitch myself as a biographer for Miss Wyman. I thought publishers would be interested in the years when she had been married to Ronald Reagan. Loretta was pragmatic and would not have minded if I found another subject. After all, the work in our book was over, and she knew I needed the money. But she cautioned me, don't do it. Not Jane is me. She recounted a time she was at Jane's house, and her secretary had said something to Jane, and Jane responded by saying, really shouting, "Shut up." In the gentle world in which Loretta's mother raised her daughters, this kind of response would have been total and was totally unacceptable. Now, Loretta had close friends and with the neighbor of Alice Faye, the former 20th century musical star. Her glory years coincided with the years Loretta spent at that studio, and I remember sitting in the kitchen of Alice's neighbors with Alice sitting beside me. She was married to Phil Harris, who'd been a band leader, but also sometimes an actor or a radio actor. He was on the Jack Benny show in the early years. But anyway, the subject, with Alice sitting next to me, the subject came up about insomnia. And Alice shared the solution that I think she said, when Phil and I can't sleep, we make a pitcher of martinis and that puts it right out. Of course it would. Now, I had heard from other sources that Alice wasn't a big fan of Loretta, and I wondered if the fact that when both were at 20th Century Fox in the 30s, that Loretta had the #1 dressing room. Had that caused friction? Anyway, knowing that they weren't buddies, I wasn't too surprised at a particular incident. I was with Loretta's party as we entered a restaurant, and Loretta was in the lead and out of earshot when I heard Alice sitting in a corner as we passed saying, "Goody, goody, there goes Loretta Young." Loretta was on a better footing with Bob Hope's wife, Dolores. Sometimes I'd accompany Loretta to daily mass when I was in Palm Springs, and quite often Dolores would be attending along with her phalanx of bodyguards, and she and Loretta would visit after church. Every time Loretta would ever introduce me, and every time Mrs. Hope showed no indication of us ever having met before. Uh, One day we were at Loretta's Beverly Hills home and we're looking at a picture in which Dolores Hope was included. Pointing to the loose skin, I kind of know what she's talking about, under Dolores's neck, Loretta said, "Oh, really? There's no excuse for that. It's such an easy thing to take care of." And of course, I know that Loretta had no loose skin under her throat. Um, that and another comment when she said, "The trick is to just have a little bit done at a time." I assumed that meant one would avoid the overstretched look I observed a multitude of times traveling in Loretta's circle. Her sister, Georgiana Montalban, Cora Montalban's wife, was the perfect example of that look. The only thing moving were her eyes. Now, whatever Loretta had done to maintain her face, it did not go unnoticed. One night we were out to dinner with a party that included Ronald Neame, who directed such films as The Poseidon Adventure, The Prime of Machine Brody, Hopscotch, and scores of others. Prior to being an editor, he had been a cameraman, filming some of David Lean's early classics such as Brief Encounter and Life's Spirit. These were British films. That night, someone asked him, "What is the most idyllic face to film?" He directed everyone's attention to Loretta and said, "That's it. There is a perfect example. Oval shaped, large eyes, full lips, high cheekbones, and a small nose. You can shoot it from any angle. Now, of course, I could tell Loretta, now in her mid-80s, by this time was very well pleased. Okay, page turn. About the same time, I remember a particular thought running through my mind. Loretta and her older sisters, Polly Ann and Sally, unlike my own parents, who had slowed down from their mid-60s on, these women were doing much of the same kind of things they were doing 50 years earlier. They were dressing up and going out and having cocktails all over the place. They seemed like they'd be going on forever, even Polly Ann, who was a heavy smoker. Now, one day, Loretta drove Polly Ann to the doctor's appointment, to Polly Ann's doctor's appointment. Both women were hearing impaired by this stage, and the young doctor was aware of this. So after asking Polly Ann if she was still smoking, and she answered yes, he walked behind the two women and mumbled, "Then why don't you just go ahead and goddamn kill yourself?" Well, Polly Ann and Loretta both heard him and couldn't wait until they got out of the office so that they could double over in laughter. They thought it was hilarious. And I think their sense of humor had bridged them over much of the pain of their past. So, on to podcast number 43. We'll see you then. Ciao.